Nathan Harden is our next speaker. His talk is Sex and God at College. Nathan was a homeschool dropout, clawed his way into Yale, graduated from there, and wrote a book that he will talk about on sex and God at Yale, porn, political correctness, and a good education gone bad. There will be a connection made between porn, the sexploitation of our culture, and the role of the modern university in terms of flourishing or human degradation. When it was the case that God was the basis for education, where theology was considered to be the queen of the sciences or the knowledge disciplines, that was easy to do, for it was thought that humans were made in the image of God and human dignity had a strong anchor. But with the uprooting of that theistic or God centerpiece, what do we have now? What is the role? What is the capability of the modern university to address these problems of injustice? Nathan Harden is not only a sought-after speaker on college culture, he's got a fantastic and interesting website, thecollegefix.com. He's also an author in such venues as the Huffington Post on the left and the National Review Online on the right, and has a very interesting and popular book, as I mentioned, Sex and God at Yale. And he is the lead singer of a rock band in Nashville called the Band of Love. You walked in and you heard some of his music. You'll hear some on the way out as well. We're going to go ahead and welcome up right now Nathan Harden.
Thanks, Corey. That was quite an introduction. So the band couldn't be here tonight, so you have to listen to me talk instead of sing. Corey's really outlined the issue that I want to talk about quite well, but you might still be wondering what this guy who wrote a book about Yale has to do with sex trafficking and human dignity. So I want to just start by prefacing that a few things about the book and why I wrote it, and then I'm going to read you a little bit, and then we're going to talk about how it applies to all this. Human dignity is a very important concept in my book because I talk about a lot about this problem that Corey dealt with, which is how do we have a moral system or moral framework in the middle of a secular university, in the context of a secular university. And that's a question that becomes immediately urgent when you read about some of the things that are going on at Yale. So I was, much like many of you in this room, a student not long ago. And probably like you, I looked at Yale with a kind of awe and a certain notion of its status as an elite institution of higher education in America. You think all the presidents who've gone there, you walk through the halls and you see the beautiful architecture, you see the names of the famous alumni and so forth. And above all, you feel like, oh, you're part of this incredibly long and elite intellectual history. And to some degree, and to a great degree, that's true. But there's also something else going on at Yale, and it's not in keeping with the image that you might come to expect. And so a lot of my book deals with this subject of an event at Yale that's called Sex Week at Yale. It originated there about 10 years ago, and now has grown and influenced much of the nation, so that even here at Purdue and many similar universities are sort of copying this type of sex education. Well, what exactly is it? In Yale's case, it involved a great deal of help and assistance from the adult entertainment industry, which you might find surprising when you think about a university like that. 3 of the last 4 presidents attended Yale. I think 2 of the last 3 Supreme Court justices nominated to the bench as well. So there's a lot of political influence, a lot of cultural influence, a lot of power in those halls. And yet, when it came time to do some kind of academic work on the topic of sex, why then were these producers from the porn industry the first ones that were called in? So I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to read you a little bit about what I heard and saw as a student in those halls. And then we're going to talk about how that applies to human dignity. So Sex Week at Yale is it's now held every year, but when I was there, it was held every other year. And it involves about 10 days, so they sort of stretch the definition of the week. And it has a lot of events on sexual health, or even some events on human trafficking, like what we're doing here today. But a lot of it came down to sort of an excuse for students to hobnob with porn stars or the like, or for manufacturers of sex toys to come hawk their goods in the halls. So I'm going to talk about that dichotomy a little bit in this passage I'm about to read you. So I'm jumping into a point in the book here where I'm attending a Sex Week event, and I walk into a lecture hall, and it says, "I noticed the ornate stained glass window on my left, which included a dramatic visual representation of the union of art, science, and religion, had images of Dante, Shakespeare, Kant, Newton, Virgil, and Aristotle on the walls." And I was there to attend a lecture by a woman named Catherine Gates, who runs something called the Museum of Sex in Manhattan. And here's some of what she had to say. Using the topic of animals as a stepping off point, Gates began to talk about, quote-unquote, cannibal play. Now, she's talking about kinks and fetishes, and this is the topic of our sex education we were receiving as Yale students. So she showed a video of a woman who was being basted with a savory marinade by a group of men. "This is Meg," said Professor Gates, or Lecturer Gates. "This is her kink. She wants to be turned into a stuck pig and pretend to be eaten." It was about this time that I began to pine for a barf bag, I can assure you. Gates went on to mention one story that had been in the news a few years before about a pair of German men who found each other on the internet, and one agreed to literally be eaten by the other. And the man, after he was caught, said this, "I always had the fantasy, and in the end, I fulfilled it." Period. That was all he had to say about it. He was not apologetic. He said, "This was my desire, this was my will, and I did it." Well, we look at that and we think, I can't even believe that exists in the world. And much like sex trafficking, I think we all have a similar reaction. We hear these stories that you've heard from some of the previous speakers. We look at these children who are exploited. We think, how can anyone do that? That's wrong. I dare say, if I can use a four-letter word with you here tonight, we say that's evil, E-V-I-L. But you see, there's something about that word that doesn't quite jive with our elite academic culture today. In the halls of places like Yale, in the halls of places like Purdue here, in academic circles, this notion of evil seems outdated. It sounds very judgmental, doesn't it, to us in our modern, sophisticated, post-religious world that we live in. That is until we hear a story like that. And so I want to talk a little bit about a famous scene from a movie that you've probably seen. Tim Keller, the gifted pastor at Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City, tells this story. You've probably seen the movie Silence of the Lambs. And you remember the terrifying role that Anthony Hopkins played of the serial killer who was a genius psychiatrist, a man of great learning, insight. And the young FBI trainee, played by Jodie Foster, she comes in and she's supposed to interview him. And it's this famous scene, and he's behind bars. And this is a bit of the dialogue, not from the movie, but this is from the book, actually, that the movie was based off of. And so the young Officer Starling, who's Jodie Foster's character in the movie, she comes up and she wants to understand how Hannibal Lecter has become so evil. What happened to him, that made him such a monster? And she said, she's curious about why you're here, about what happened to you, she said. Nothing happened to me, Officer Starling, Hannibal Lecter responds. I happened. You can't reduce me to a set of influences. You've given up good and evil for behaviorism, Officer Starling. You've got everybody in moral dignity pants. Nothing is ever anybody's fault. Look at me, Officer Starling. Can you say I'm evil? Am I evil, Officer Starling? I think you've been destructive, she says. For me, that's the same thing. Is it, though? Hannibal goes on to say, you could have a storm that's destructive. You could have a building catch on fire, and that's destructive. But that's a little bit different than evil, isn't it? Evil is something that can be destructive, but it's something beyond that. It's something that we sense is a matter of the right and the wrong. And I think one of the things that a conference like this gets at is this fundamental question. In these times where much of our culture, and certainly our elite academic culture, has rejected God, has rejected a biblical foundation for our moral system, we are left with an uncertainty about what is right and what is wrong, and why, more importantly, anything is to be considered right or wrong. So in a place like Yale, for instance, something like that happens, and you might start to get a little bit of a sense that something's wrong here, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is. Well, Professor Gates went on to say probably about the most shocking thing I've ever heard anyone to say after her instruction about cannibal play as a form of sexual expression. And I want you to listen to what her words were, because they're very telling. Anything goes in fantasy, Gates said. But if you're going to act in reality, it needs to be safe, sane, and consensual, not including cannibalism, presumably. In the lingo of my generation, all right, hey, whatever turns you on, right? So, standing there at that Yale lectern, at that platform that Yale had given her, I heard a faint collective gasp in the room when she said, and I quote, "As far as I'm concerned, you can fantasize about beheading babies and screwing them in the neck." And when I say screwing, I'm using a more polite term than she used on that day. Like I said, there was a gasp in the room. I mean, it was just a shocking moment. But I have to say this, as much as I disagree with Catherine Gates and her worldview, and certainly her morals and her moral system, I will say this about her: she's being incredibly consistent in terms of her take on moral relativism. She really takes it almost to its logical end. And that's what so often in our times we're unable or unwilling to do, because we sense that, no, that's wrong. There's something evil about that. We can't pin down why, but it makes us uncomfortable. We feel it's wrong, right? I want to talk briefly about one more episode from Sex Week at Yale, and obviously there's a whole book, and it's not all about that. It's about a lot of things that are going on at Yale, but I would say, on the whole, the book covers the moral and academic decline of a once great institution. And I try to delve into why that decline has happened, why that decay has happened. But first, let me read you this other anecdote from the book. I went to a classroom that was very familiar to me. I had taken an international relations class in this very same classroom. But as I write here, on this day, I was about to receive instructions on relations of a very different kind. I look up to see our speaker is about to begin her talk. This speaker was a woman named, I'll just call her Ms. Young. She is a porn performer, and that's how she makes her living. But on this occasion, she was brought to give instruction on what's called BDSM, bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism. This was another part of the sexual instruction that we were being given at this prestigious elite school. Ms. Young reaches the podium and she begins to shed her coats and extra layers. Quote, "I want you to be comfortable," she says. "BDSM is very much about feeling comfortable in your own body." So she takes off her shoes and begins doing this yoga-like breathing exercise. And the class does the exercise along with her, raising and lowering their arms with each breath. Getting comfortable. Suddenly, she lets out this screeching cat-like meow, which startles everybody in the room. And then she gets into the BDSM basics. The B stands for bondage. It can be handcuffs. It can be zip ties, she says. It can be rope. Anything that's restraining you. It can be neckties. The D is for discipline and dominance. Dominance is more about power. Okay. S stands for submissive, often associated with service, the dominant, the slave, the teacher, and the schoolboy. S&M stands for sadism and masochism. Sadists give sensation, or what might be referred to as pain. Is everyone in here 18 or over, she said then? It's an important question because she's about to fire up the video projector. If you're not over 18, would you please raise your hand, she says. And I'll never forget what happened next. When the video turns on, I see an image of Ms. Young herself, completely naked, bound with chains. A man on screen begins lashing her with a whip, red welts visible across her torso. I have to avert my eyes as the man continues to beat her. In between blows, I hear him taunting her and hurling insults. He orders her to repeat the insults while he beats her, and she does. To this day, it's hard for me to read that. Not because in this day and time this is the age of the 50 Shades of Grey, right? This stuff it's shocking, but in another sense it's not shocking because we know that this has become a part of our sexual culture, this brutalism, this violence. This is the internet age, okay? I'm not coming to you as a choir boy who was shocked that this thing existed. But what was shocking to me was to see this presented as an acceptable form of sexual expression in a university that prides itself on being a bastion for liberal human rights, feminism. Yale has a very conscious image of itself as at the forefront of these kinds of issues. So why, in this place, was a woman being openly and horrifically degraded and demeaned in the context of, quote-unquote, education? And that's a question that we could spend hours talking about. But let's give you the condensed version of it. And it has to do with the history of the university that Corey alluded to in his introduction. Yale began as essentially a Christian seminary, a missionary training school. It's supposed to train up preachers to go across the colonies and spread the gospel. And over time, it became less religious and more associated with service to the country and about training up leaders and military leaders and political leaders. And now I think Yale doesn't stand for much more than its own elite, the propagation of its own elite status as an elite institution. There's a saying at Yale that's for God, for country, and for Yale. It's the motto that we say, but kind of turned on its head, you can almost read that as a history of the university's decline, as it served a higher purpose, and then a patriotic purpose, and then ultimately no purpose but its own pride and prestige. So the question is, the four-letter word I mentioned before, evil. How can we, Yale's not going to go back to being a Christian seminary, let's be real, okay? So how can we say at a secular institution like that, or like Purdue, some of you in this room may be Christian, some of you may not be. How can we say at a place like this, or like Yale, what ought to be permitted, or what ought to be the goal of the academic enterprise? How does that relate to what I just read to you? And I think the answer to that rests chiefly on this question of human dignity. If you look at it from a Christian perspective, we are made in God's image, and that's the source of human dignity. If you look at it from a human rights perspective, you could say that humiliating, hurling insults, demeaning someone for the purpose of your sexual pleasure is a violation of human dignity. I think Yale as an institution has really lost the intellectual framework with which to even make these kinds of judgments anymore. Even if the administrators there feel that these things are wrong and wish they would sort of not happen, and there are plenty of those people on campus in leadership positions as well. They have no moral groundwork with which to say this is not acceptable. Only a few things are within their moral framework anymore, and they are limited to, I think, we understand that racism is still wrong, and I think they can take a moral standpoint against that pretty without a problem. There's an environmentalism that we can all pretty much agree that's good to take care of our planet. You get much beyond those kinds of, issues that everyone agrees on. There's anything that has a controversial element to it. They don't have anything left to stand on in terms of, hey, this is allowed to go on in our university, this is not. Okay, so I target the leaders of Yale, the administrators, most of all when I criticize them for allowing an institution like Yale to be demeaned and to serve really a purpose that I think is degrading not only to the people who are using violent pornography like this, but also to those who participate in it. Can you really say that it's in keeping with modern feminism for a woman to take money and allow herself to be urinated on film? Okay? Some of you may be shocked about the things I'm talking about here. Okay, let me clue you in. This is mainstream pornography now. Okay, I'm not talking about Hugh Hefner and his cute bathrobe. I'm talking about violent, brutal, bluntly racist pornography. Okay, this is what our generation is being raised on. In a sense, Yale may have been the forerunner in bringing this into the academic or giving it legitimacy in the realm of elite higher education. But this is what kids from the age of 10 on are facing on the internet day in and day out, okay? And I'm sure you've already heard how linked to the issue of human trafficking pornography is. And many of these people who are being filmed or photographed are not doing so of their own free will, or they're under compulsion, or they're being exploited as minors. So how is all of this connected to the issue of human dignity? It goes back to Hannibal Lecter, right? Do we have the courage anymore as a society to say something is evil. And if we don't, how do you know that it's wrong to exploit a young child in sex trafficking? You feel that it's wrong, but how do you know? And that's really where our intellectual pursuits have reached, I think, their end. They can't answer that fundamental question. If my own will and my own desires are the highest good that I know, if there's no higher authority, no higher moral authority that I can appeal to beyond my own will, you are left with nihilism, which is essentially what Yale and many of its similar academic institutions are ushering in year by year, one student at a time, inching and inching and inching a little closer toward that. I once knew a nihilist, or a guy who claimed he was. Nice guy. A nihilist, in case any of you don't know, is a philosophical term for someone who ultimately rejects the idea of a fundamental moral framework, that there is such thing as good and evil. That's a sort of a quick definition of it. And I think moral relativism, which is what our society is really saturated with right now, is just a step in that direction. But what's so great about an issue like human trafficking is it brings so many of us together, regardless of where we are politically, conservative, liberal, atheists, Christians, whatever religion. We can all kind of get together on this one, right? I mean, I've never met anyone who was a real booster for this kind of activity. And so it's a great conversation point for some of these bigger issues. But I would encourage any of you here who are thinking about, this in terms of what it means for you spiritually, right? Any of you who maybe you've questioned your, religious beliefs, or maybe you grew up in a religious family and you've come and you've kind of thought, well, I don't really know if what I grew up with was legit. I don't know if it was intelligent. I don't know if it was something that intellectually I can support any longer. I've come and my mind's opened up to a lot of reality. Okay, I went through a similar kind of phase in college. And I began to question a lot of the things that I grew up in a very faithful Christian home, preacher's kid, okay? And, I grew up, started learning about science, started learning about philosophy, and I began to wonder, have I sort of just bought into whatever my parents sold me? But I'll tell you one of the things that kept me engaged in the question of God through all that struggle, and that was the problem of evil, the right and wrong. How can I, without a higher moral authority other than my own will, how can I say that it is wrong to rape, kill, steal, destroy, whatever I might want to do? And so I had to, because I believed, and I still believe, that if you are to reject the idea of God entirely, I'm not talking about agnosticism so much, I'm talking about real atheism here, like a hardcore philosophical point of view. I believe the inevitable moral consequence of that is nihilism. And so that kept me engaged in a place of seeking throughout all that period of my life. And, it's funny because the question of evil, the problem of evil, is really one reason why a lot of people reject God. Have you noticed? Have you heard this? People say, if there were a God who was a loving God, he wouldn't allow things like sex trafficking to happen. He wouldn't allow some terrible natural disaster and all these innocent people. He wouldn't allow suffering. It's hard. How could there be a benevolent, all-powerful God who would allow these things to go on? Doesn't he care? Maybe it makes more sense to just say, hey, It's all just random. There's nobody up there driving the ship, so to speak. That is a very frequent cause of people leaving their faith, okay? The problem of evil. But have you ever thought about this? That evil, paradoxically, is also kind of a great proof of God, and I'll tell you why. It's because no matter who you are, no matter what you believe, even if you believe with all of your mind that life is random and meaningless, you will not live that way. You will not be able to live as a nihilist with complete disregard to right or wrong, killing, taking, stealing, raping, doing whatever you want to do to fulfill your desires. You have this moral urge inside of you. Have you ever thought about that? Now, there's a lot of debate about why that is, and even evolutionary psychologists will try to explain this in terms of social behavior and social development. But at our core, we have a sense of right and wrong that we cannot escape as human beings. And you have to, in your life, account for that in your own heart. You have to account for why that is, and that's a huge obstacle to overcome if you are trying to escape the idea of God. So, in that sense, if you believe as I do that the rejection of God also means the rejection of any absolute right and wrong, explain to me why you cannot live that, why humans have such a hard time actually being nihilists. Maybe the answer is that God is very much real, and that the evil that we are here talking about, the violation of human dignity that so outrages all of us, regardless of our political or religious beliefs, maybe that hatred of evil points us to the fact that there is a good, there is a right, and there is a good and righteous God, where all of those moral urges originate. So, I want to leave you with that thought, and I want to have some time for Q&A tonight, because I know that you guys probably have a lot of questions, and a lot of you have been to the previous events, which I want to catch some of those online, because I hear that they're really good and compelling. So, Corey, do you have something you want to say before we get into that?
Yeah, we have, if we can get the stage lights to come up just a little bit, or back in the audience. We've got a microphone right here. If you've got questions, Nathan's going to take questions for about 30 minutes, and we'd like for you to just come forward. Anything about his book, his experiences, things that he's just said recently, and he's going to field those. I would ask, though, that you not make big statements, but that you take the time to ask a genuine question, so that we don't have to take the mic away or turn it off. So, as you're making your way forward, one microphone right in this aisle, so we're not going to do both aisles this time. Okay?
Hello. Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, well, I have a friend at Yale currently. And she's really bright, and I love her very much. And I think I'm speaking for a lot of us here as college students. What would you say to a college student, or even to my friend at Yale, so she can keep her own dignity at Yale and not be tempted by all the things that go on at a college campus such as that?
That's a great question. I had a good friend who, she was a year, I think, behind me at Yale, and she talked to me about how, and I mentioned her in the book, she talked to me about how all this affected her, right? She was not a participant so much in all of these Sex Week events. But she said that she found it degrading just to know what was going on around her, to know the way this kind of hardcore porn was being put up as and legitimized in the context of a classroom. So she did find it demeaning. In her case, and in a lot of people that I knew who navigated that environment successfully, the key was having a peer group, that shares your values, even if it's a small one. That's a huge encouragement. So you have any number of Christian groups. I know my new pal Ben down there runs one of them here. What's the name of your group, Ben? Purdue Collegiate Ministries. So there's a lot of groups like that, InterVarsity, Campus Crusade, that are on these, student ministries or just informal groups or your friends that you keep. That's important because when you go outside of your sort of bubble that you grew up in, right? If you grew up in a religious home or sheltered in whatever way, that's great. But one of the great things about college is that you get to question a lot of those things. You might encounter belief systems that you haven't encountered. And really, if you have never had your beliefs tested, that's probably not a good thing. You probably need to know why you believe what you believe. So it's not bad that you're coming into an environment where you're going to meet people with differing opinions. But make sure that you're not simply carried away by the peer pressure or the stream of, you go into a place where, 90-95% of the people think that you believe what? I mean, maybe it's a little less extreme that way on some campuses, but in general, you're coming into this time of emerging adulthood, and it can be tough. So, yes, ask those questions, get those questions answered, but make sure you have a peer group around you, whether it's your local campus ministry, your local church, whatever it is, so that you're not simply being influenced by a new set of peers and the peer pressure that goes along with it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hey, friend.
Hey, thank you. You talk about calling the leaders of, say, Yale to task for some of this stuff,
yes.
But what can we as students do to combat trends like this?
Well, it starts with your own personal life, right? We as guys especially, right? We have the temptation of pornography all around us, okay? That's the reality of 2014. So that's another thing where a peer group can help. You have to realize that while it seems harmless, and I think that's the lesson of some of this, and that our moral culture says, well, if it's not harming anyone directly, it's your business, it's not a right or wrong. Okay, but how do these things chip away at our sense of human dignity? How do these things chip away at the way that we, as guys, look at women? Okay, we know that these things affect us. We are living in a pornified culture right now, and pornography is not the same, okay, as it was 20 years ago, because the internet has vastly quickened the rate at which these things are getting more and more extreme, and more, it's impossible to regulate. Even, the law enforcement can do the best they can possibly do. So start in your own heart, start in your own life. But if you want to speak out, I think that's a huge thing too, to be visible on your campus group. If you're a person of faith, okay, be visible part of that group. And if you want to look long term at how you can affect it, I look at who are the professors at these schools, who are the administrators there. I mean, now you're going back 30, 40 years. Who's going to be leading these institutions, years from now? I don't know that you have any interest in being in academia, but whatever your career is, you might find that it has something to do with this. if it weren't for the moral cowardice of many of the people who lead Yale right now, things wouldn't have gotten as bad as they are. And in fact, when I started writing about it, you would have been amazed at the reforms that started to happen, because light is the best disinfectant, as the cliche goes. Okay? It's a big problem. Any of these things, you look at it and you're like, exactly, what can I do? Human trafficking? I mean, Ben was just telling me about someone in his group who was asking the same question, what can we do about this? I have some friends in New Haven, which is, their office is just a few minutes from the Yale campus. And about 10 years ago, they started a group called Love 146. They had no money, no PhDs, no experience, no qualifications. And this group has done some of the most awesome work. They built aftercare homes for kids who were rescued from trafficking. I think you heard from someone from IJM yesterday or earlier today. Okay, they do a lot of this incredible rescue work. But one of the things I learned is if you don't give these kids a place to go afterward, they often will end up right back in with the same brothel that they left. Oftentimes, it's their families that sold them into it. So you can't take these kids and just bring them back to their mom and dad all the time. You have to provide, long-term therapy, care, a home for them. So they started this group with just nothing but a dream, and now they're, supporting this place on the other side of the world. I think they've got a couple of homes now. They've rehabilitated these beautiful young girls and brought them from basically the gutter of this world, where they were being raped repeatedly, 8, 10, 12 times a day, and now they brought them, and some of them have grown up, and they're wanting to go, and some of them have gotten married and had families, and it's a beautiful thing. So find what you're passionate about if you're passionate about these kinds of issues, and just go do it, like they did, and you never know what could happen.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Sure, go ahead.
You mentioned earlier how one of the defenses against there being a God because of kind of a social growth, as in like an evolution, when two people or when two types of morals are growing up, you've got the people who do not care about what happens, and you've got the people who understand that there is a good versus evil battle going on inside of them. Mm-hmm. And I actually have a friend who is atheist in nature, and he has asked me about that, and I have trouble talking to him about that because his belief is along those lines as well.
Yeah.
I think where if you have someone who lacks morals, they're part of a very few, and then most people in the world do not feel that way. And so by evolution, people who are on the extreme end, that there is no morals, there is no right versus evil, they tend to, I guess, die off, if you say that. How would you answer him?
Yeah, well, when we talk about evolution, let me make sure that we're talking about the same thing, because there's evolution in terms of, that's consistent with the existence of God and the creation, and Him as creator. And then there's another kind of, you could use the word materialist, evolution. So the sort of evolution that doesn't account for any higher power or any God, right? So I think that's what you're talking about. Right. This is what is very interesting about that kind of evolutionary belief. It's a faith system, okay? Because it deals with the unknown and the unknowable, right? That's what God is, in a sense. He's, by nature, supernatural. Is beyond our natural ability to completely comprehend. In the terms of evolution or materialist evolution, that's dealing with epochs of time that we can no longer observe. So at some level, this debate becomes just a matter of what is your preset point of view. Do you come to this as a Bible-believing Christian? You kind of see it this way. If you come to it with someone who doesn't acknowledge the existence of God, you see all the evidence as pointing back this way. That's the kind of magic of natural selection. You can explain anything that is backwards. Because anything that is now, you can say, well, it was advantageous in terms of natural selection. So I don't know that you really win this argument with either way, with a philosophical system. I think faith comes whether you're having faith in a materialist history of the universe, or you're having faith in a living God. So I would say if your question is how can I sort of talk to my friend or be an influence to him about that, and you specifically want to talk about the question of where we get our morals from, or what the problem with that evolutionary view or that materialist view is, it's still really just dealing with my preference, how I feel about it. That's not the same thing as an absolute right and wrong. That's saying, because those things change over time in cultures. There were cultures where sex slavery was not considered a bad thing, okay? There were times in history where keeping a boy or two on the side was perfectly acceptable in privileged society of the ancient Roman world, for instance. So I think that, that answer in terms of how I feel about it the Christian worldview, and if I can put it in other terms, doesn't really depend on how I feel about things at all. That's the real difference. I'm believing that God has set this moral framework, and he's given me a conscience that sort of reflects that. But there may be plenty of things that I like or don't like about that biblical moral system, right? So on one hand, that's the biggest difference, is are we just talking about our personal preferences? At the end of the day, is sex trafficking wrong just because a lot of us don't like it and we don't think it's really fair? Or is there a fundamental question of evil? I don't think your friend's worldview allows for a fundamental evil. I think it allows for an evolving consensus of the good or the beneficial or the socially beneficial. That's something very different. So for him to really accept his worldview, he ultimately, to be philosophically, intellectually consistent, has to reject an absolute right and wrong. So maybe that's helpful.
It is. Thank you.
Hi.
Hey.
My question is, do you think there's a difference between porn and prostitution? And if not, why do you think porn is more acceptable and prostitution isn't?
And by a difference, do you mean like a moral difference? Like is one more wrong than the other? Is that the kind of what you're asking?
I mean, like behaviorally wise, they're both getting paid to engage in sexual activity.
Yeah. Well, this is another point where the morality that does not allow for the existence of God, or God as the foundation of morals, really falls short to me. Because when it's just a matter of two humans' consent, you have a hard time saying that prostitution is wrong if that's your worldview. Because, well, someone's doing something willingly, they're taking money. If consent is all you have, and that's really in our secularist society, that's really what it boils down to. Is it consensual? Okay. Is everybody of legal age and consent? That's all that matters. Well, I don't think that's enough at all, okay? I think that God calls us to something far higher, and the standards for sexuality, biblical standards for sexuality, are extremely high. They're so high that all of us fall short of them, okay? But here's the amazing thing about biblical sexuality. Marriage, the sort of defining of sex within marriage, that was hugely revolutionary. Up until the early Christian times, nothing like this had ever happened in human history. And what's incredible about it, and one of the reasons why it's so bad that is under attack today is how much it elevated the status of women in the historical world. Okay? You have to realize women were basically treated like property in the ancient world. Very little choice even on who they married or how they were treated. I mean, heaven forbid you were a female slave in somebody's household, because it was going to be bad for you. So, the idea that you have to, that you would have to save, your sort of sexual life for this one woman and for your wife and be faithful to her, hugely radical. That's a little bit of a tangent from your original question. But no, I don't think there's really any difference ultimately, because the standard, the biblical standard, has nothing to do with mere consent. Of course, consent is part of it. But it's calling us to something much higher than that. It's calling us to reserve our bodies for our spouse alone, okay? It's a hugely high standard. Even to lust, right, is as adultery in the Bible. So it's calling us to something so high that none of us have perfectly met it. But pornography is wrong fundamentally because it dehumanizes us. And sex is meant to be a kind of sacrament of marriage. It's meant to be a physical representation of a spiritual reality of a union, okay? And in that way, sex within marriage becomes a unifying and a kind of ceremony of commitment over and over and over again throughout that marriage. Whereas pornography, much like prostitution, is a matter of using. It's transactional. It's not a covenant. It's not about commitment at all. Both of those other things are simply, I want something from you, you want something from me. It's a transaction, and that's all there is to it. That's a demeaning of what sex true purpose is, and so that's where they're kind of in the same boat.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Are we taking questions just on this line, or I know you've been sitting up there for a while, so.
No, I mean, you can go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. Howdy. So I'm a Purdue student, and
Okay.
I started out in the vet school. And for the first
Which school?
The vet school.
Okay.
And for the first 2 or 3 weeks, we were taught why we were given this education, why these principles were being taught to us. I was just curious, how do the Yale professors or the administrators or anybody who was in charge of this Sex Week program, what is their purpose? What are they what is their end goal? Why do they think their students need to know about BDSM? I mean.
Yeah, well, I should give you the context. Sex Week at Yale was a student-led, student-organized event. It was carried on with the complicity of several people in the faculty and with the cooperation and financial, in some cases, support of people in the administration. Every room that was used, for instance, was approved on a case-by-case basis by the dean's office of Yale College. So Yale's response, official response, was always to wash up its hands. Well, we allow this in the name of academic freedom. We allow the widest, latitude of personal expression. We don't discriminate at all about, different point of views. Of course, that's nonsense. There would never be a Ku Klux Klan week at Yale, nor should there be. Okay, so don't give me the line that we allow the widest latitude and it's academic freedom. And I saw a woman getting beat before my very eyes within a stone's throw from the president's office, okay? He's responsible. And he announced his resignation about a week after my book came out, which was very interesting timing, I thought. He held on for the rest of that year, but you're responsible. If you're a senior academic leader, you are responsible for what happens on the podium. I'm not talking about what students did in their dorm room, what they talked about in the quad. I'm talking about what you put up there under the stamp of legitimacy as an academic institution. You cannot say that you believe in the dignity of women and put forward that kind of humiliation of women as a legitimate form of sexual expression. It just doesn't wash. And that's where their moral system really fails. Because a lot of them, to be honest with you, didn't want this stuff going on either. They just didn't have the guts to stand up and say no, because they've rejected all of the moral foundations that years and years ago would have allowed them to say, hey, this is not right. In the 1950s, a man named William F. Buckley wrote a very famous book called God and Man at Yale. It was mine was sort of a modern update on, look where we are now. In the 50s, Buckley's chief contention was the classroom isn't very Christian anymore, and they're getting kind of communist up in there. Those were his two beefs, right? It looks quaint beside the realities, the hardcore realities of Yale today. So you can't allow people to sidestep responsibility like that. Yes, academic freedom is important. Yes, there is a wide latitude for all kinds of points of views. But if you aren't going to allow the Ku Klux Klan or somebody like that in there, then don't allow this in there either. That's my statement to them.
Thank you.
Yeah. If you want to give your question, I think we're going to need you to come around up front here. I don't think the mic will work, or will it? Oh.
Hello.
Oh, you got it. Okay.
I was born and brought up in a Muslim country, and my parents are Hindu. So I was born and brought up in a Hindu home.
What country?
The United Arab Emirates.
Okay.
So after coming here, I didn't have much exposure to Christianity over there.
Yeah.
But after coming here, I had more exposure to Christianity.
Sure.
So, what I have noticed is that, okay, let me start by saying, so all religions say that their holy book is said by God himself.
Yeah.
Whether it's Yahweh, whether it's Allah, whether it's Krishna.
Yeah.
All of them, and the Pope himself said that a few months ago, said that all of them pray to the same God. Mm-hmm. So, why did that same God say different things to all different religions? Why are there different morals in different religions? I feel like in many aspects, some religions even contradict each other.
Mm-hmm. They do.
Yeah. So, what is correct and what is wrong? There are some really controversial things said in some religions. I can give you a few examples. I've read that slavery has been stipulated in the Bible, I think in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, and the concept of jihad in the Quran, and other things as well. So what makes stuff said in all religious books correct? What makes this religion correct? What makes that? What is correct?
Okay. That's a big question. And first of all, let me start by saying I agree with you that these religions do contradict one another, okay? And I don't think that they're all saying the same thing. You're asking a big question for just a few minutes here, but I want to try to do my best to answer it. First of all, I want to distinguish between culture on one hand and religion on another, because a lot of times those things get mixed up, and you feel like, well, I'm from this culture, so I'm from a Jewish culture, so I have a Jewish religion, or I'm from a Christian culture or Catholic culture, or this culture or that, or I come from a Hindu culture. So try to set all that aside for a minute and realize that biblical Christianity is equally applicable to any culture, any person, no matter where they're from. It's not exclusive to Americans, or it's not exclusive to any group. But when we grow up with a certain culture around us, and I think a lot of Christians, so-called Christians, call themselves Christians, they grow up feeling, well, that's who I am because that's kind of what my family is. But coming to faith in Christ, which is really the only one of these religions that I can really tell you much about, because that's the faith that I believe that Jesus Christ is the one and only way. I mean, he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. So other religions, and especially Islam notably, like they're kind of kind toward Jesus. They recognize him as a prophet or whatever. But Jesus doesn't really allow you that. He really makes you choose him or reject him. A man who claims to be the Son of God and who, he doesn't leave you a lot of wiggle room to say he's just kind of a good teacher. You know, you either have to accept such a radical statement, which we hear that and we're like, what? That's crazy, right? But how can you say that he was a benevolent and good teacher if he said those words and he lied? You can't. He either was the only way or he was a pernicious fraud who deserves to be our scorn, okay? Now, you could read all kinds of books that would argue one way or the other, and I encourage you to do that, arguing for or against Jesus or Islam or whatever religions that you're asking questions about. You know, for me, the question of Christ comes down to more than an intellectual question. It's that he offers something supremely radical, and that is salvation by grace through faith, that he came and offers you. God became man and died so that we could be redeemed, okay? That's unique. And many people who were his contemporaries attested, who lived with him, his disciples, they lived and they died saying they really saw those things. They saw him raised from the dead. We look at these things in our mind. I mean, I've been through the highest levels of our academic system here. I know how unintellectual all that sounds, but look at the reality that we're all here. It's shocking that the world exists, okay? We try to account for how is this world made? How are you and I all standing here? It demands an explanation. So, it's impossible for me to answer all of your questions I know in this short time, and I'd love to talk to you some more after if I can. But that's where I begin to just point to you there that Jesus doesn't allow us to say that it's him and this religion and that religion. He sort of forces us to choose. So I hope that's helpful. And again, I'd love to talk to you some more afterward if you like.
Sorry for the long question. Thank you.
Yeah. How are we doing on time, Corey? One more question? Okay, sorry, everybody. I've been told by the MC that they're giving me the old ring on the neck. I warned Corey that I would be endlessly talkative if he let me. So one more question.
Good evening, sir.
Hi.
So I'm Chinese and I was born and raised in China.
Yes.
I think I'm inclined to be an atheist.
Yes.
And during this presentation, you were talking about atheists will lead to consequences.
Yes.
So I assume you were talking about bad consequences. So is it okay that I tell a story?
Yes, please do.
Even though that I'm atheist, I have a great respect to discipline. And about 2,000 years ago, that people in China started to become atheists instead of believing in all kinds of God. And about 1,000 years ago, there was a time that China was so prosperous that people are very trusting each other. And if you are hungry, you can just go into others' home and eat from their table. There's nothing wrong with it. And if you're a traveler, you can just walk into others' home. And there will always be a home prepared for travelers. So I'm really asking, will atheist means nihilism, and atheists will have a very bad consequence on the society?
Yeah, thank you for that story and for asking that question. First of all, let me say this. There are plenty of good, moral people who don't believe in God. They make moral choices, they care for others, they do good things. And there are plenty of religious people who do lousy stuff. Okay? This is not a question of saying that you can't do good or help others or be generous or all of those wonderful things you alluded to. What it means is that none of those good actions or bad actions actually have any real meaning. Atheism, nihilism, means that to do something good or to do something bad is essentially the same thing. Because if we're nothing but random molecules, if we're nothing but an accident flying through space, then at the end of it all, it really doesn't matter what we do at all. But I think in our hearts we sense that it does matter. The good does matter. If we harm someone, it does matter. We know this. And I think that's a deep challenge to atheism, that fact that we have a sense that life has some purpose beyond random molecules flying through space. So I encourage you to keep following that urge within you, because what I hear in you is that while you can't yet believe that there's a God, you do have a sense that love and beauty and the right are worth pursuing in this world. And that, I believe, is an urge and desire that God gave you that would help draw you to Him. So please continue to pursue that urge that's in your heart. Okay? Thank you. Thank you, everybody.